Basic psychology. The biological approach. The influence of genetics on behavior.
Have you heard of the nature-nurture debate?
Yes, it's the debate on whether our behavior is determined by genetics or the environment.
Exactly. Did you know that our genotype provides the genetic code for our characteristics?
Yes, and our phenotype is what actually happens when our genotype interacts with the environment.
That's right. For example, a person's genotype may dictate their height, but environmental factors such as poor nutrition may not provide the required nutrients to reach their genetic potential.
Similarly, there may be a genetic predisposition for certain behavioral traits, but the environment may cause it to be inhibited.
Exactly. Our genes carry instructions for the development of characteristics such as intelligence and temperament, but their expression depends on how genes interact with one another and the environment.
It's important to note that behavior is not solely determined by genetics or the environment, but rather a combination of both.
That's correct. Understanding the nature-nurture debate is essential in understanding how our behavior is determined. The genetic basis of behavior.
Have you ever wondered how much behavior is influenced by genetics?
Yes, it's an interesting topic. Research has shown that up to 80% of characteristics such as intelligence can be attributed to genetics.
That's fascinating. How do scientists determine the influence of genetics on behavior?
They focus on identical and non-identical twins. If identical twins show a higher likelihood of sharing behaviors or disorders when compared to non-identical twins, then genetics and genotypes are believed to account for this. The influence of biological structures on behavior.
What about the influence of biological structures on behavior?
The biological structures of the brain consist of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Both of these influence behavior. The central nervous system controls and coordinates all the physiological elements of the individual, while the peripheral nervous system manages the body's response to any threats.
That's interesting. How do these nervous systems carry messages?
They carry messages all over the body through individual nerve cells known as neurons. These transmit nerve impulses as electrical signals, and most aspects of behavior are under these neurons' control.
Wow, I had no idea. The influence of genetics and biological structures on behavior is fascinating.
It is. It's important to understand how genetics and biological structures can affect behavior to better understand ourselves and others. The influence of neurochemistry on behavior.
How our behavior is influenced by neurochemistry.
Neurotransmitters and hormones play a significant role in our behavior.
I read that hormones stimulate receptors on the surface or inside of cells, causing physiological reactions that alter the activity of the cell. What are some examples of how hormones affect behavior?
Testosterone, for example, has been indirectly linked to aggression, with some psychologists believing it causes status-seeking behavior. Other studies have found that high levels of testosterone energize sports players when playing in their home territory.
That's interesting. What about neurotransmitters?
Neurotransmitters are chemicals that travel via cerebral fluid and are released when nerve impulses reach the end of a neuron. Some trigger the receiving neuron to send an impulse, while others inhibit, stop, impulses being sent.
Are there any neurotransmitters that affect behavior significantly?
Dopamine and serotonin are two neurotransmitters that psychologists have focused on as they are believed to affect behavior. Dopamine is an excitatory neurotransmitter related to drive or motivation, while serotonin is an inhibitory neurotransmitter that helps stabilize moods. Some research has also found low levels of serotonin can lead to increased aggression.
Wow, I had no idea. What happens when there are high amounts of dopamine?
High amounts of dopamine have been linked to schizophrenia.
Evolution and behavior.
Have you ever wondered why animals behave the way they do?
Yes, I have. It's fascinating to see how they adapt to their environment.
Exactly. Did you know that Charles Darwin's natural selection theory explains behavior from an evolutionary perspective?
I've heard of it, but can you explain it to me?
Sure. A random mutation in an animal's genetic makeup due to environmental pressures can lead to a physical or behavioral change. If this change increases their chances of survival and reproduction, it becomes an adaptive trait that can be passed on to their offspring.
That's interesting. So, animals compete with one another for resources, right?
Yes, they do. And if an animal has an adaptive trait that increases their chances of gaining access to resources, they become more likely to succeed over their competition.
I see. What about aggression? How does that fit into this theory?
Aggression is seen throughout the animal kingdom and may have served the purpose of increasing survival rates and resources as well as the protection of territory. Researchers have focused on the MAOA gene as a possible explanation for aggression.
Interesting. So, environmental pressures of the past may have shaped the existence of this gene in men?
Exactly. It's fascinating to see how behavior and evolution are interconnected.
The biological approach evaluation.
Did you know that the biological approach uses the scientific method as its main form of investigation?
Yes, I did. This gives the approach validity, right?
Exactly. Studies using this approach take place in highly controlled laboratory settings, making replication of the same experimental conditions for the verification of results possible. The results gained are also more objective as they are based on biology compared to subjective reporting or observations.
I see. What about the nature-nurture debate?
The biological approach is one of the strongest supporters of the nature argument as it explains behaviors through genetic influences. Research studies have found higher concordance rates for psychopathological behaviors such as depression or even aggressive tendencies among relatives.
That's interesting. What about predictions regarding behavior?
The biological approach can make clearer predictions regarding behavior and possible links it has to biology. For example, predicting the effects neurotransmitters have on behavior becomes easier when looking at those who are genetically related. This has contributed to the development of drug treatments and real-world applications. For example, identifying common neurochemical imbalances and then creating drug therapies which help reduce depressive symptoms.
I see. What are the limitations of the biological approach?
A major weakness is that it is considered reductionist as it attempts to break down complex human behavior and explain it through the smallest parts such as genetics, hormones, and neurochemical imbalances. Another limitation is that it overlooks humans' free will and ability for conscious thoughts. This raises serious ethical issues, particularly when applied to criminality. Behavior. Trying to explain criminal behavior through genetics could lead to genetic screening of the population to identify those with a predisposition for criminal behavior. Such individuals may be stigmatized even if they pose no such risk.